The return of the king. He had lost everything. His throne, his country, his army. He had been forced to live in a small house in a foreign land, an emperor with no empire, watching from far away as a cruel enemy ruled his people. For 5 long years he waited. And then, the man the whole world had ignored came marching home. He would win back his stolen throne. He would rise to become one of the most respected leaders on the entire earth. And on a small island far across the ocean, people would begin to do something that has never truly happened to any other leader in modern times. They would begin to worship him as a living god. But first, he had to go home. For 5 years, Ethiopia had suffered under the Italians, but the Ethiopian people never truly gave up. Up in the mountains, brave fighters called the Patriots kept resisting the whole time. They refused to accept the invaders. They kept the flame of freedom burning, waiting, always waiting for their emperor to return. And then the Great World War changed everything. Remember, once the war began, Italy joined the side of the great evil, and that made Italy the enemy of the powerful nations like Britain. And suddenly, those nations wanted to knock Italy out of Africa, and to do that, they finally wanted Haile Selassie's help. So the emperor left his little house in England. He traveled back to Africa, and side by side with British soldiers and with his own loyal patriots pouring down from the mountains, he began to fight his way home. And this time, they were winning. The Italian grip on Ethiopia began to crack and crumble. Town after town was set free, and the emperor, at the head of his people, marched closer and closer to his stolen capital city. And then came a moment so perfect that it almost feels like a story. Haile Selassie marched back into Addis Ababa, his capital, his home, in triumph. And he returned on a very special day. It was exactly 5 years to the very day since the Italians had first marched in and taken the city from him. 5 years earlier on that date, he had lost everything. And now, on that same date, he rode back in as emperor once more. Can you imagine the tears? Can you imagine the joy? The people who had suffered for 5 years under a cruel enemy, watching their beloved emperor ride back home, free, alive, and victorious. The man they had prayed for, the man who promised he would return. He had kept his promise. The Lion of Judah was back on his throne. Now, with his country free again, Haile Selassie set to work rebuilding. And in the years that followed, he became something much bigger than just the emperor of one country. He became a voice for the whole of Africa. You see, back then, most of Africa was still not free. Country after country was still ruled by European powers who had come and taken the land for themselves. But all across the continent, the African people were beginning to rise up and demand their freedom. And Ethiopia, proud, ancient, unconquered Ethiopia, became a shining light for all of them. It was proof that Africans could rule themselves. It was proof that an African nation could stand tall and free. And Haile Selassie became a hero to people fighting for freedom everywhere. He worked hard to bring the nations of Africa together. He believed that if all the African countries joined hands as brothers, they would be strong and no one would ever be able to bully them again. And he made it happen. The leaders of the African nations chose to hold their great meeting in Ethiopia's capital city. They came together and they formed a union, a family of African nations, promising to support one another and to help every part of Africa become free. And Haile Selassie stood at the very heart of it.
Because of this, he became one of the most famous and respected leaders on the whole planet. He traveled the world. He met presidents and kings and queens. Huge crowds came out to see him wherever he went. The quiet, dignified little emperor from Ethiopia was now a giant on the world stage. But here is one part of his story that is stranger than all the rest, and you may find it hard to believe. Far, far away, across the ocean, on the island of Jamaica, a brand new movement had been born, and it was built around Haile Selassie himself. Here is how it happened. Long before Haile Selassie became emperor, when he was still known as Rastafari, some religious teachers in Jamaica had been searching their Bibles and looking for signs. They believed that one day a great king would be crowned in Africa, a black king who would be a savior for people of African descent all around the world, especially those whose ancestors had been taken away in the horror of slavery. And then they heard the news. In Ethiopia, a man had been crowned emperor, a powerful African king, and his titles were astonishing. He was called King of Kings. He was called Lord of Lords. He was called the Lion of Judah. To these believers, those were holy titles, titles from the Bible, and they became convinced that the prophecy had come true. They believed that Haile Selassie was not just a king, but a divine being, God returned to earth in the form of a man. And they named their whole movement after his old princely name, Rastafari. They called it Rastafari. And so, across the sea, a whole community of people began to look to Ethiopia as their holy land, and to Haile Selassie as their living God. They honored him, they prayed in his name. To them, he was the most important person who had ever lived. Now, here is the fascinating part. Haile Selassie himself was a devout Christian. He worshipped God in the ancient Ethiopian church, and he never claimed to be a god at all. When people worshipped him, it seems to have made him uncomfortable. He gently told people that he was only a man. But that did not stop the movement from growing. In fact, it grew and spread far beyond Jamaica, all around the world, until millions of people knew his name. And then, one day, Haile Selassie actually visited Jamaica, and what happened there was almost unbelievable. When his plane landed, a massive crowd was waiting, so many people that they flooded onto the runway itself. They were weeping, they were cheering, they were desperate just to catch a glimpse of the man they believed was their god. It was one of the biggest, most emotional welcomes the island had ever seen. So picture the incredible heights this man had reached. He was the emperor of an ancient kingdom. He was a hero of the Second World War, proven right when the whole world had been wrong. He was the great father of African unity. He was famous and respected across the entire planet, and to millions of people, he was a living god walking the earth. The boy that people once thought was too quiet and too soft had become one of the most towering figures of the whole century. He had reached the very top of the world. But here is the hard truth about the top of the mountain. There is only one way to go from there. And back home, in his own beloved Ethiopia, trouble was quietly beginning to grow. A shadow was forming. While Haile Selassie was busy being a hero to the whole world, some of his own people at home were growing angry and hungry and tired. Because for all his greatness on the world stage, at home, Ethiopia was still very poor. Many people still couldn't read. Many still had no land and not enough food. And the emperor, who had once been a young man full of new ideas, was now growing very old. And an old ruler can sometimes stop seeing the pain of his own people right in front of him. The love that once surrounded him was beginning ever so slowly to turn. And soon, a terrible disaster was going to strike Ethiopia, a disaster that would bring the anger of the people to a boil and begin the downfall of the Lion of Judah. To be continued in Part 4. Don't go anywhere, because in Part 5, the great emperor is going to fall from the very top of the world all the way down. A hidden famine, a secret film, and a quiet revolution are going to tear away everything he built, and the way his long, incredible life finally comes to an end is a dark and painful mystery that still shocks people to this very day.